you have a lot of conversations in your book, and you also have conversations with people like me on your podcast, Soft as Steel, which is also available everywhere where you listen to podcasts,
Yeah.
which is good. And can you give us just a little pitch and insights into what people can get out of listening to your podcast?
Just they're all conversations. As you know, I mean, there was no pre-planning, no agreement on questions to be asked or topics to be covered, regardless of who the speaker was. I simply said, I'm going to write a little introduction about you, and we're going to have a conversation for 30 or 35 minutes. And the conversations, every conversation mentions somewhere and touched somewhere on my four areas of interest: love, inclusion, social justice, and leadership. May not touch on all of them, but generally a couple, two to four of them are mentioned every conversation, because that's all that continues to be important to me. I've had, and I'm talking about things that are relevant to this point in time, as this conversation is taking place, as well as looking back a bit, but more importantly, looking forward. So I've had some particularly interesting conversations with women leaders, because again, the issue of women in the construction industry continues to be a front burner topic. And depending on who you're talking to or talking with, it's either the kind of conversation I think it needs to be, or it's a troublesome conversation. And that's
Yeah.
also the case when you talk about people of color, and you talk about other different kinds of things that differentiate people. That's why I talk about inclusion, about everybody being part of the future of the construction industry. Um, and they're fun conversations. Not as much fun, however, as this conversation was. But I think I was able to take an otherwise very sensible, balanced, and serious young person and turn him into a laughing nutcase. And it, that's so, and I mean that with all respect. But that's what it, and it's good stuff. They run 30 or so minutes. You can listen to them in the car when you're driving to a job site, when you're driving home from work, um, and uh, uh, and it's just a lot of good stuff being talked about that's relevant.
Yeah, I agree, and it's perfect. It's the perfect length, 30 minutes, once a week episode, very consistent. Every Tuesday, you get a new episode, and it's the perfect episode to listen to for a commute. My commute's about 30 minutes long, and I'm able to get an episode in on my commute once a week. I really appreciate it. I actually shared your podcast whenever we first did my interview, and a couple of different senior leaders in my organization listened to an episode of your podcast, or two, or three, or four, and all of
Mm-hmm.
them had nice things to say, and I had them pull me aside, say, "Hey, that's a cool podcast. We listened to this episode with this leader in this other construction company, and I really enjoyed listening to it." So
Good.
it's a good podcast to listen to. That's some feedback from me to you, from my people to your people. But
Yeah.
it's a great listen, and you guys should give it a listen. It's Soft as Steel, the same title as the
Yeah.
book. And then lastly, Dennis, you are you are a keynote speaker. You have guests on your podcast. How can people reach you if they are interested in sharing their story and joining you in one of your conversation pieces, or they want you to share your story on their podcast or at their event?
I'm very accessible through LinkedIn messaging. What do we call it? Things you can click on something on my web page that says talk to Dennis directly, and you can go direct to my calendar and grab an appointment to talk to me. I'd be happy to do that. And all my other contact information is there as well, including my email address. So there's three easy ways to get a hold of me, and I'm delighted. I never if I see an appointment pop up on my calendar and I don't recognize who the person is, all I do is confirm the appointment, and look forward to the conversation. So if you got some of your listeners and they want to hear a little bit more, or want a little more understanding about anything I talked about today during this 5 hour podcast recording. Oh no, it's not. It's only 4.5 hours. Never mind. So all
Yeah, and
right,
your website is
Dennis Duran speaking, all one word. Dennis Duran with two N's and Dennis and speaking at the end.com. And I've been wondering, I'm thinking maybe I should change it to soft as steel. I don't know, but it's Dennis Duran because I speak. I do speak. It's like my son says, people pay me to speak, so it's Dennis Duran speaking. That's that. Never mind. I'm not changing it. That's the correct. So anyway,
Thanks so much, Dennis. And for those of you that are lazier, you can just go into the show notes of this episode of the podcast. You can find a link to that in the show notes, or you can find it in the YouTube description if you watch on YouTube, where you should be commenting, liking, subscribing, and sharing with your mother, your brother, your sisters, and anybody other. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for joining us this week. And thank you for spending the day after Thanksgiving, your Black Friday, with me. I appreciate the time and the story. And I look forward to listening to this back over once I'm
Yeah,
done editing it.
yeah. Yeah, well, just make sure you get all of me out of it, then it's gonna be about the right length.
Oh,
It
no,
was
never.
absolutely my pleasure to talk to you again, Daniel.
All right. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Communicating, I miscommunicating. I just made a pilot, then they threw me on the stations. Nah, I'm not complaining, nah, I'm not complaining. My thoughts get complicated, I cannot explain in lameness. Never losing focus because I ain't chasing payments. Still playing in the basement while I'm working on arrangements. They heard the kid in 50 countries, thank God that's amazing. But I'd rather thank Spotify, they put me on the